Everyone, this is me and Sally again, where we continue our journey to basically building all the components and pieces required to initialize an ASP.NET Core API. It's a little project that I call Sophie, and it's a very generic project that basically helps people kind of save data like, countries, counties, cities, regions, languages, time zones, whatever the case may be. And in the last session, we basically went in and we basically built the unit test project, and we also added infrastructure component. Today, we're going to add another level of testing on top of that, and I'm going to show you what that is in a second. So, so what is really acceptance tested? At this time, we're going to be building something called an acceptance test. It's another project that we need to build in here that ensures us that the endpoints that we develop, like for instance, if I have an endpoint like this and this endpoint is supposed to return something like "Hello Mario, the princess is in another castle," the idea here is to ensure that this data that's coming back makes sense and that my endpoints are functional, especially when things get a little bit more complicated with adding more data, adding more regions, languages, and whatever the case may be. Now, how do you do that? How do you go about, going out there and initializing an acceptance test? These acceptance tests basically mainly in general kind of gives you they're a little bit different than a unit test. And let me explain just graphically first what does that mean and why they are very different from an acceptance test. So I'm gonna go here into our Blackboard. This is just launch this app. There it is. Okay. So hear me out, and this is really important. On on the unit test level, you're basically testing three things. There's threes and threes and threes and everything. On the unit test level, you're basically testing the validation, right? And the actual logic, the processing, and the integration. These are the three components that you find in some foundation service. Like if you're building a little service, remember how in Sally library, we basically went and said, okay, let me validate that the data that's coming in is in good state, remember? And then we went and said, let me make sure that the data is in good state, and then let me call the broker to add that data. And then the third one is to go and say, well, if the broker threw an exception, I need to be able to map that exception into, that's what I call logic. So on the foundation service layer, this is foundation service. Our unit test is mainly focusing on making sure that our tests, every single permutation in each one of these functionality is taken care of. So think about this guy as your unit test. So what your unit test is doing, this is your test. What your unit test is doing, so this is unit test. Your unit test here basically goes and says, let me mock the dependency, because you would be calling a dependency some broker, right? So you're in here dependent on some broker, right? Let me go mock this guy. Like pretend that when you're doing your integration, you're actually thinking that you're talking to a real integration, but this is actually mocked broker. So we went and mocked this guy. So this guy's mocked. And then it also went and said, let me pretend to be a consumer on this side. So this is consumer or a client. And this guy is basically going and saying, let me pretend to be someone who's actually passing data into your system. And then the unit test main responsibility is to test, the healthiness state of all of these components and all the different permutations that happen within your one foundation service. That's the unit test. However, there's another layer that's a little bit higher than that takes care of something else. So it's the exact same pattern, but it's a little bit different. This here is the microservice layer. What is this microservice layer? This is the entire API layer. So you have in here foundation service, and you have here brokers, and you have here controllers. So it's like zooming out. We're zooming out a little bit. And this here is called acceptance tests.
Yes.
And what this guy really is doing, it's going and saying, let me pretend to be a consumer that actually hits the API endpoint that you're going to be talking to. And let me validate that these components are attached together. So now it's not mocking a broker. It's actually saying this is sometimes it emulates a resource.
Mm.
So this guy pretends to be a consumer and it emulates a resource and it takes the entire service. So remember, this entire block in here is this one block here. So you're zooming out. You're basically zooming out a little bit. Okay. There's another layer of testing on top of that. See, they're all following the same pattern, just like the universe, from an atom to a galaxy. The same thing. You have something in the middle. Okay, so this is here a system. And this system is microservice 1, microservice 2, microservice n. N meaning any number of services. And this guy emulate external resource. And it pretends to be a consumer. This is what I call integration test. Because in a system, you have many services. You see how we zoomed out? We started from one block, which is this guy, and then we took on the entire service, and then we took on the entire system.
Right.
What's an example of that? Just so you understand, an example of that, assume that you have a bunch of services in a system, right? So you have a bunch of services sitting like this. And let's say you have an orchestration kind of service, this is actual microservices with APIs and whatnot. And then you have maybe a user interface sitting in here. This is UI. And this guy is calling like a gatekeeper in this case. So this is a gatekeeper service.
Mm-hmm.
And this is maybe service 1 and maybe service N, right? And this is your UI portal, whatever the case may be, right? We have 3 different layers to make sure our system is actually in a good state. We test every service individually, right, with a unit test, and then we test the end-to-end borders of that service with acceptance test, and then we test the whole system as a whole together. That's what this is. These are 3 different layers of tests that we're going to be playing around with for a bit. Okay. Yesterday, we just scratched the surface. We just basically went and said, build me a unit test project. The project that I will be using, which you and I have done in the Learning C# with Sally series. Basically we went in and said, let's mock dependencies and let's see how things work. That's this part. We tested the validation, the logic, the integration. Now it's time for us to jump into the next layer and initiate an acceptance test. And we're going to test it. We're going to test it by hitting that home controller and seeing if that home controller is actually building the stuff that we need. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Let's go and build an acceptance test. Let's go to Sophie Core. Here is the project right here. And I'm going to go here and initiate an acceptance test. So I'm just going to go here and say add new project. I'm going to select XUnit as a type, just like a test project. But now the difference is, the difference here is that it's sophie.core.api.tests.acceptance. The other one was called unit. This one is called acceptance. And there will be one that's called integration, but it may or may not live in this project. We'll see. Okay, great. We have this guy. Let me take this guy here. This project's initiation is a little bit different, Sally. It's a little bit different because it needs to hit an entire endpoint. Like it needs to go through that controller. It's actually calling the real world API that we're actually working with. Okay, so what are we going to do about that? Let's first create a new branch in here. New branch, users.
Can you please zoom in, Bruno?
Huh?
Can you please zoom in?
Zoom in? Yeah, let me zoom in give me 1 second here. Let's see, display settings. Let's go into
How did you create new branch? Oh, new branch for that Git. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Can you see it better now?
Yes, yes, I do.
Okay, perfect. So
Okay.
this is, and then I'm gonna do infra because I'm still initializing, right? And then,
Mhm.
acceptance, initialize, acceptance,
That
test,
let's
project.
see.
Okay, so that's another infrastructure component, right, that I just created here. And I basically added this acceptance test. Now, I want to write tests that goes and hits the controllers. It hits the entire system end to end, right? If I'm calling a controller an API, I want to be able to validate that it's actually going all the way to the database and coming back. And these acceptance tests are much lesser than unit tests because it's not trying to permutate, possibilities. It's just going and saying, is the system intact? Is your controller actually talking to the right service? And is the service doing the right job? So it's basically covering up something that your unit test doesn't. Does that make
I
sense?
see.
Like
Yes.
whatever your unit test is not able to cover, this one, like you remember
Mhm.
in our unit test, we didn't really test the brokers. We didn't test any of these
Mhm.
things. We just basically went and said, I want to be able to
Mhm.
create a simple a simple API communication. Anyway, so here's our acceptance test in here. I'm gonna create a little folder in here, and I'm gonna call it brokers because the
Okay.
acceptance is actually is making API communications, right? And then I'm gonna go
Mhm.
here and create something called API test collection. And bear with me on this one. Has a little bit of magic in it, so let's just take it slowly. So here's this guy. Okay, so this is the class API test collection. By the way, the names are not really set in stone, but we try to give it a name that makes
Mhm.
sense. Okay. Okay, so this is the API test collection. I'm gonna go here and make this a public class, just as usual.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna add an annotation here that says this is a collection definition, right? And this is name of API test collection. API test collection is basically the class that we're working with. It's basically gonna try to initialize my API through this class. It's a little bit, I'll
Mhm.
explain in a second. I'm gonna go here and say add collection fixture. And I'm gonna add in here the the Sophie API broker. I don't have that API broker yet. We're gonna have to go build it,
Yeah.
right? Because we don't have anything that actually communicates with the API, right? So let's go
Mhm.
build this guy. Let me go here and say, okay, here's this guy, and this is Sophie API broker. Okay. This Sophie
Mhm.
API broker is going to have to carry all the other things that we care about, and I'm going to tell you what this is. So this is public partial, right? And then I'm gonna go here and define a few things. Private, read-only, web application factory. This web application factory is gonna create a phantom version of my API. It's basically gonna create, instantiate my API,
Mhm.
and after it instantiates my API, it will basically give me the ability to communicate with that API. So I'm gonna go here and say startup. Where is this startup file coming from, Allie?
The API and the core API.
Yeah, this guy. So I'm
Mhm.
initializing this
Mhm.
program here, right? So it's really
Mhm.
underneath. It's just nothing but a program. So I'm just going to go here and say startup CS. How do I do that? I'm going to add a reference. Look, I'm going to
Mhm.
go here and add a reference to my project, right? So I'm going to go here and say, there it is, dependencies, add project reference, and I'm going to add
Mhm.
Sophie API. Okay, bear
I
with me. This stuff is, it's not very common out there, so please bear with me. This is really important. So I'm just gonna go ahead and say Web Application Factory. That's the name of it. And then I
okay.
also want something called an HTTP client. And this HTTP client helps me actually make the connection, make the communication. So I'm gonna initialize that HTTP client.
Mhm.
So this guy stands up the API and this guy calls the API. So this is me
Okay.
running the API and this guy calls the API. Okay.
Mhm.
And then I'm gonna go
Okay.
here and use a serialization nice library that I built called RESTful API factors called RESTful Sense. I was just talking to Ricardo about this. It's an external library that we're gonna have to build, kind of pull in here. I'm gonna add it in here right
Mhm.
away. Just to let you know, the details about this are not super important in terms of it's just something that you do once and you continue building your project. But if you really get to the nitty gritty of these things,
Mhm.
I would personally highly appreciate it because understand why things work the way they do work. Okay, so
Hold on.
this is
Didn't we add like RESTful? I forgot the name. RESTful before we did add when we made the controller, right?
yeah, but we just added it to this project. Now this is a new project
Oh,
here.
now this is the new project. Every
Mhm,
project we should add.
mhm.
Okay. Fine.
So this is, yeah, so I'm gonna call this API factory client, right? And
Mm,
then let's instantiate our method. So here's this guy here, and I'm gonna go and say this dot web API factory equal new factory, great. HTTP
mhm,
client. This web API factory, since this is an abstract function, it's not just gonna let me create a client and then in here I'm just gonna go here and say API factory client equal new RESTful
mhm,
API factory client. I'm gonna pass in that HTTP client to it. That's it. I stood up the API. I
mm,
instantiated the core component that will help me talk to that API, and then I added in this library to ease the communication between these two, so I don't have to kind of serialize data coming back and forth. And I'll show you how painful that is to do by hand versus just doing it through a nice library like this. Any questions so far? Ask me all the questions in the world, because this is, again, this is a lost art. Not a lot of people talk about that, but it's really, really important. So any questions, anything at all?
mm. No, I think it's clear for me right now. Mm,
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I have the API test collection. I have, the Sophie API broker. This is a partial class, right? This is here is a partial class. Now, what that basically means is that I can go and build something like a home API kind of partial.
mm,
I'm gonna go here and just go like this and go and say class like this, and I'm gonna go here and say Sophie API broker dot home dot cs. This is a partial class out of the original one. And
mhm.
all that it's really doing is just giving me the capacity and the capability to be able to go and make API calls. That's really all that it's doing.
Nice.
Okay. Since there's only one API call that I care about, I'm going to go up in here and say private constant string. What's the URL that we're hitting? So this is home relative URL. And we are hitting API slash home. Remember when we ran the API, we went to API slash home and I said, hello, Mario, the princess is another castle. That's exactly what
Right?
this is.
Mm,
That's the endpoint. Okay. And then let's go back in here and say public async. Okay. And this guy is returning it's returning a string. There's a string and gonna say here, get, um, let's get home message, something like that.
mm,
I'm gonna go here and say await this dot API factory client dot get content async, and it's a string from the home relative URL. That's basically all I'm looking for to basically bring that guy in. So what this guy is gonna do, this method here, what it's gonna do, it's gonna hit the API endpoint that's in here and verify that this message comes back from the API. Does that make
mm.
sense? So I
Right.
don't have to run the API every time I want to verify whether the API is working or not.
Mm,
Okay. Okay. Okay, so now what's the next step? The next step here is to actually write the API, the actual test, right? I'm gonna go here. Notice that acceptance tests happen after the fact. Unit test has to be written
mm,
first. It has to fail, and then we write the pass. This one, the API is already developed. We're just verifying that it's working end to end. So let's just go here and say APIs. So this is the thing that you're actually testing. And inside these APIs, I'm gonna make one here that says home. And inside home, I'm gonna write my home test. It's gonna be home API test, right? So in here, it's gonna be like home, oops, sorry, home, home API test, just like this.
mm.
Are you with me? Okay, so
Yes.
let's add this here. This is public. It's also gonna be partial. We're gonna come to that one. Partial class, no magic there. It's just very straightforward. This is a bunch of tests that I'm trying to work with. No problem there. So okay. Since since this one, is really a simple one, we're not really passing anything or creating anything. It's gonna be very, very straightforward. I'm just gonna go here at the top of this one, and you need to do this for everyone. I'm gonna go here and say collection like this, and I'm gonna go say this is name of this is will initialize my collection, my API connection. It's an API test collection. This guy that we went back here and built, which is the magic. I like to call it that, the magic. This is this guy. Really, that's really that all that it is. It's basically doing that work for us. Also, there's one weird thing. Since we initialized this at .NET 6, it's doing this crazy thing where it's doing global usings. I'm not okay with global usings. It's just a topic that, something that just got added to the .NET 6. Let's see, it's packable, target framework, all of this nonsense. Let me see here if I can disable those real quick because they're really annoying. And you just give me a second there. Let me find out. There's a way where we
What is
can
doing exactly?
so it's
This.
basically doing global usings. Like if you call this once in one place, you don't have to call it anywhere else. I find
Oh,
that to be quite irritating and it's really bad.
mm-hmm.
So anyway, let me fix this real quick. I'm just
Mm-hmm.
trying to find a similar project where we're doing that stuff. There it is. Implicit usings and nullable. There it is. If I go here,
Mm-hmm.
nullable, disable, and implicit usings. Now you're gonna find a lot of errors. Like if I go here, maybe not this one, but definitely the API collection. Wait for it. Oh, do I need to load and reload the project? Give me a second. Reload. Just I want it to error out. If it doesn't error out, that means it didn't work. Let me try to build it. If I build it, it'll probably wake it up a little bit. Did I put that in the wrong place? No. So implicit usings. Oh, never mind. This is in the same namespace. Okay, this one is fine. This one, okay, we should be fine. We should be okay. Anyway, so let's go back here. While I'm at it, so this is the API home API tests. Now, what are we gonna do now? We just need to go and basically initialize this guy. So since I have this API collection, I'm gonna go here and say public home API tests, and this guy is taking in the Sophie API broker like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just, basically initializing it. I'm basically going and saying, give me private read-only Sophie API broker, like this. I don't think I initialized that anywhere else. So this is Sophie API broker. Here we go. And let's see here. Okay. So this guy is instantiated here. And then what's my expected message? Which is basically us saying, hello, Mario, the prince is another castle. So I'm going to create another one in here. And I'm gonna go and say, this is the test.logic. Logic basically meaning just go ahead and hit the endpoint and come back to me with whatever it has.
Right.
Now, how do we write this test? I'm gonna go here and say fact public async task should return home message async. That's a test. And in my test, here's my given when then. See, we're back full circle to this one. And basically, I want to go here and say, and I don't think we need that guy in here. We already added it once. We don't have to add it multiple times. And the message here is that expected home message, right? It should be this guy. The home message that I expect in here is this guy here. Hello, Mario. The princess is in another castle. This guy right here. Now, all I gotta do, this is my expected home message. I just need to make the API call, right? So I can go here and say string
Mm-hmm.
actual home message like this, and I can go and say this dot broker. So see, it's not mocked. It's actually calling the real guy, right? And I'm just saying get home message. By the way, this should be get home message async because it's making an asynchronous call. Let's do that.
Mm-hmm.
Here we go.
Message.
So now I can go here. It's basically saying go hit the API, hit that endpoint /API/home, and get me that message to verify that our controller is actually working. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Right.
Okay. So now I'm gonna go back here and say This actual message should, right, be equivalent, right? I don't have the library here. Let's get that library here real quick. What's it called? Fluent assertions. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. And then I'm gonna go and do fluent assertions. I'm gonna go and say be equivalent to, or be rather, and then expected message, just like this. That's it. That's our test.
Mm-hmm.
Let's run it and see if it actually works. So this guy is actually gonna spin up the API and tries to hit the API endpoint, and we're gonna try to make it fail as well, just so you understand how this works, right? Okay, let's see. This guy's actually failing. Let's see why it failed. It's basically saying unexpected character encountered while parsing path line. Let's see what we have here. So this guy is going like this. I think we can just go do. Okay, let's try. Normally it's expecting you to pass in an actual object and it needs to be serialized. But let's just see if this works here. It passed. See?
Mm-hmm.
So what does that mean? If anybody goes in and says, hey, let's remove the period. Let's remove this dot, this full stop from
Mm-hmm.
here, and go back and run this test, it'll say, nope, no match. Because that means something happened in your API that broke its integration. See, if I look at the message here, it says your actual home message is not equivalent to your expected home message.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the end-to-end integration. When we start building, services, foundation services, see how easy that was? We just, it's not really that simple. It has a lot of details in it, but you get used to it, you're going to be able to build your own, very easily. Now, since we have now two different projects and two tests, let's run everything real quick. Done. Both of them now are running. So these are two different projects.
Mm-hmm.
One of them
Right.
verifies that it's just a delete me, just a simple one, but this one actually is going to stay because this is actually calling the home API controller broker. It's a great way to start and say, yeah, I'm actually connected. That's why we
Mm-hmm.
make that home controller. Okay, so now the only step for us to do is to basically go here and say, okay, let me clean up the solution. So right click, analyze, and code cleanup. Here we go.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to go here and say infra, initialize, acceptance tests. Now here's the trick about this. What I want to do here, let's step over to GitHub real quick. What I want to do here, Sally, is to basically go and say, I want to make sure that my pipelines, that build pipeline that we built together, is picking up that acceptance test. I want to make sure that it's actually calling that guy. So let me go here and say Sophie core. Here's my API. I create the API. Okay, here's my API here. And then let's just wait for this guy. There it is. I want this guy, this build function, this workflow that we built yesterday. I want this guy to be able to pick up and run not just my unit tests, but I also want it to run my acceptance tests because acceptance test guarantees that the endpoints that you're going to be running and deploying to production, the endpoints that people are going to be using, are going to actually be usable and working. So when you deploy something, when you deploy something and there's an error in production, you know for a fact that it's not your code that's doing it. Something happened in the data, someone modified the data, some topic to talk about, some duplex validations back and forth. But anyway, this is just another advanced topic for another day. Right now, we just basically want to verify that this is running. So while this guy is running, I'm going to jump back over in here. And let's see if you have any questions. This is basically what we did today, Sally. We basically went and initiated an acceptance test. Okay. And we basically went and said, here's my acceptance test, and I want you to go and hit that controller. So go here and pretend to hit that controller. Now we don't have a foundation or broker, components yet. But once we start adding more code in, we're gonna be actually going end to end with this project. Does that make sense?
I guess. Yeah.
Okay. Any questions at all? Any concerns?
Mm, not now. So I think I got it. But let's see. I will review again to see if I come up with better questions.
Yep. Watch the video that we're recording again.
Mm-hmm.
Watch everything. You can, I'm saying a lot of things really fast because when people watch the videos, they can stop, slow down, go research what I'm saying, or just make sure that they're verify what I'm saying. Verify what I'm saying just to make sure that you understand what this and
Yeah,
research these little pieces. There's a lot of information, a lot of knowledge behind
exactly.
this.
No, everything like following the things that you are doing was clear. So,
Okay,
but
perfect.
I might miss something. So if I go back and listen, so maybe I'll miss some.
Sounds good. Look at this. It found the first test and it passed, and it
Oh,
found the
that's
second test and it passed. See, just
mm.
sweet and simple,
Oh,
no
no.
problem
Oh,
there. Okay, so
perfect.
that means I can go back here and I can go and say, okay,
Mm-hmm.
initialize acceptances. We have successfully initialized our acceptances, and that's another project. So going back to our list from yesterday, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our list from yesterday, we went and said, okay, we gonna initialize 5 projects, right? I think we
Yes.
said 5, right? So now we are
With
done,
including with the core, I guess.
right? Including core. So this is core API, and then
Mm-hmm.
core API tests unit, and then
Unit
core API tests acceptance.
acceptance build
And then there's
process.
scope, yep, core API infrastructure build, and then there's core API infra provision.
Provision.
So these two are the only ones that are left before we start actually writing any code in. And
What is
these two,
infrastructure? I just
in
forgot to search for that field.
the build or the provision.
No, the infra
Infra
board.
means infrastructure.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's just infrastructure. It basically means the
Mm-hmm.
underlying, the underlying
Mm-hmm.
components that help us run our software, basically.
So yeah, I was like curious why you didn't call infra for that other one. So, but when you build project, you put when you export it, you write down infra,
Oh,
right?
for these, that's because I'm just putting in the foundation it's not
Mm-hmm.
really actual, it's not really actual code. It's just foundation containers for the
And
work that we're doing.
mm-hmm. Okay.
Once we start adding brokers, we're gonna start saying, oh, this is a broker, this is a service, this is a foundation, this is all that.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make
Exactly.
sense?
Yes.
All right, that wraps up our session today. I'll connect with you tomorrow
Thank
and we
you.
will build more projects. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank
I'll
you
talk to you
so
tomorrow.
much.
Thank you, Sally.
Thanks,
Take care.
Deborah.
You
Bye.
too. Take care. Bye.